creative. Be creative. Please be creative. Be creative. Please be creative. Be creative. Be creative. You must be creative because to be creative is really to have a fighting chance. You are creative in your fight for the good chance. You are good in your attempt really to fight for it. You are a chance for a good fight. Be creative. I understand you may be convinced already that you must be creative. I understand you may already have been fighting before this pixel-soaked stretch of literature even made its way into your hands. But then there is a good chance that you may need a little more elaboration in order to be brought to the need really to fight for it. I will try to convince you. I will try to give you an example. To really have a fighting chance to be passing through. I was traversing a field of blue and I came across two lines. The lines were certainly two as I counted, and I could be almost certain that they were parallel. However, as I looked out across the field, which was really a blue as deep as any church's old basement sanctuary, I was stricken with the impression that the lines converged as they grew farther away from the point at which I happened to stand. And then I truly began to understand. Be creative. Please, be creative. One of the lines is a story that took place mainly on land. Be creative. Please, be creative. One of the lines was the story of all plants. Now surely you begin to understand. I hope at this point it is clear what I am saying as regards the story of land and the story of plants. At this point they can only appear to converge as a product of a certain stance. Well, then what to make of a blue field? And what to make of the good chance? If we are merely to stand in the field, we are trapped in a metaphor. It can even be said that we really are living within a metaphor, so why not head for a hill, a road, a train track, or at least a little lavender? Be creative! And what to make of a line-shaped story? Do you really think, dear listener, pray tell me honestly, do you think that the story of plants and the story which took place mainly on land are really ever going to come together in such a way as to really create a game to acknowledge it and to permit the gameplay to advance? Will they ever be able to join in the hope of a real fighting chance? And have I not already said that the two lines were parallel? In the example there was never a possibility. You must begin to see that in the Bluefield example there really was never a chance for the good chance. Yes, it may have looked as though the lines of the stories converged as they ended, but the perspective that the Bluefield afforded was merely a matter of stance. And more deeply, how much of the world can we fit in this story? And truly, what is a straight line to even a single plant? Moreover, what is a single plant to a single plant? Many have asked or died trying. How much of the world can be creative? Please, you can't even tell a story that captures a single plant. Some very tall people believe that there is no way out of the metaphor, or at least that this is the meaning of the ways in which they tend to act. Many such people are not trying to be very creative. They have no need for the good chance. The fight is really more of a dance for some of the tallest people on land, but nonetheless there is something that they too should understand. The parallel lines will never converge no matter where on the blue field they endeavor to really stand. And despite what we've heard from our teachers, yes, even our very creative and fighting teachers, there are no parallel lines, points, pixels, or pentagons outside of those that we imagine that we hold in our heads' hands. I understand, listener, and nor can I blame you, that you might have been led to believe by those same trusted and cunning teachers, who in the faculty lounge could be heard to say it was time well spent preparing to teach you to rub the chalk dust off an apple and call it math, that the school crown life winner is the one who has read, remembered, rewritten, and borne witness to all that a teacher can convince a pupil to pick up in a backpack or a tablet, or even to memorize by rote from a Mercator map or a biology textbook, or by repetition in the muscles on the floor of a gymnasium with the aid of plenty of milk and a yoga mat. And And who but those same very clever teachers to determine the position in which you happen to stand like a judge with a relish for half-sours tasked with awarding the blue ribbon at the biennial canning and pickling exhibition. At the foot of a teacher's lectern there is no fight but writing, where to learn is a mad dash, a tiresome wrist mash. The grade is to re-officiate from a videotape of a track meet after the fact. Anyone who calls the private performance of judgment creative is either misinformed or a teacher, for who can even the cleverest teacher really evaluate in the solitude of a living room on a couch cushion the color of a father's eye? And for who with a cup of hot tea in the hand? And for whom by the warm and aching light of an incandescent reading lamp? Have indeed learned something from the yoga mat or the apple or even the math in the backpack, but that which you have learned and which you have been forced to have fought for, that twice-baked red chicken scratch of whatever 7-dog life hack happened to hand back your homework at the beginning of last class, have as little to do with each other as toy boxes and stained glass. The chalk dust was never wiped from the skin of an apple in math class. It was the dust of a broken rose pink pastel and a paint bucket empty of pigment in a south-facing storage closet you got out and upset in the middle of the table in April in 8th grade art class. And were you seasick or fruit-struck when out of the bucket there emerged an apple? No doubt a very creative and fighting apple. And everyone who could see it was sure as their tongue was averse to it that it was made either of plastic or wax, the possibility of the matter depending on the temperature of the closet in which the bucket had been known to have sat, thus most likely of plastic. You blew it off for a still life because you knew that you were expected to be creative. But dear listener, you will see best from the top of your schoolyard's flagpole that there is no harm in attending as long as you know who created the apple, how to fight it, and whether to call it math. For there are some points in school on which are made many markings unseen and unevaluated by the gray and dusty eye of the teacher, and to catch or have caught even a glimpse of any of them is worth every suspension, detention, or even accolade that a principal's dungeon can muster. Better to fight directly, but if you are in a room with only tall people, sometimes you cannot but move to their music. This is not unforgivable and has even been said by certain janitors to be necessary when dealing with other faculty and staff. At this point, whether or not you at first need a convincing, you are ready to hear what is the most creative and fighting example of the necessity of the need to be creative. To really excel at creation is to know that there is only a festival. To fight is to acknowledge that the only distance worthy of consideration is that of a mime from the theater. And at this point I'd like to turn your attention to the flag. What's the difference between a blue field and a body of water and a world flapping with fabrics? I invite the listener, dear listener, to put forth even one possible method of determining whether the indigo cloth of the banner should be met by the eye of one who looks with success for the seed of a future and colorful meal, or of one whose hope of winning the fight for potable water is about to be really dashed. That is to say, can you prove, dear creative and fighting listener, that there exists in the blue of a flag a trace of the artist's decision to depict either a sprawling blue monocrop, a graniferous colthogen, whose alerone layer is rich in anthocyanins, or a sky-kissed old fish bath, the old salts and expanse? Now there is indeed one point at which the story of the stories of all plants and which took place mainly on land come together with the story of that old salts and expanse. It so happens that one of the many possible stances that could have been taken was taken quite arbitrarily by another one of the many several mimes in the employ of the fighting chance. The reader will be happy to know that the mime had spent all afternoon being creative. And from their position they really did understand. The point of convergence was precisely at the edge of the blue ocean where salt mingled with sand. And they swore, though later none would believe it, that they even could hear a few lines of a comedy in which the sand and salt played the parts of the innumerable celestial bodies, delighting the water who became lost in the drama and laughed to see to the possibility of apricots into the shape of a cupped hand. And it was all a terrible little accident. Be creative. Please be creative. There are as many reasons to fight as there are dog eyes and teardrops. Please be creative. Listener, if the epithet yet remains apt and you are indeed still with me, or even if your eyes, ears, and fingers have long since tired and moved on, I would like to thank you for considering each example that I have offered you. Now going forward, there will be no more offering. Instead, I would like to show you something. Will you watch as I sow the seeds of the scene? Thus I have ceased exemplifying. Now I will relate a story that is not a mere hypothetical. Now I will tell you what happened. I was riding in the back of a pickup or a flatbed from a train station, or at least it seemed like it by the taste of the air that morning. Each mouthful bleeding summer from sunshine's arrow and cauterized with the salt from the ditch, which was brimming with a winter full of road sand. And I turned to the mimes next to me, who were just trying to get a little further from wherever it was that they came from. And I asked them if they could tell the driver to go down through the main street when we hit town. Luckily, the driver was also a mime, and my message was passed along without even a gesture. Or at least I have always taken for granted that that is what happened. As you might imagine, no words were spoken. And before I knew it, I was seeing fewer and fewer Utrecht blue wheat seeds as the number of indigo banners steadily increased. I was closer than ever to that old rose-hip churchyard whose sun-baked back wall we bounced yellow rubber inflatable balls off of. As the driver and other mimes argued over certain side streets, even the bounds of the argument felt familiar, or I felt that they would have if I had cared to turn my head the roughly 1 decimeter required to cast a glance at them. But there are some things that I did see. Since my eyes were open, there were, in addition to the flags and the wheat fields, many familiar things passing before me. I saw a house that was not what it could be, and a house that was long past what it once was. And the house that was not what it could be was green, and under a gray sky with a shady tree, and next to it, after a small space with a dog in a metal frame with a bright stain of rust and a rope swing hanging crookedly, there stood and sometimes leaned the yellow paint shutters and front steps of the house that was long past what it once was. And following another interval of grassy houselessness was a weather vane in front of the same gray sky under which stood a circular Victorian tower and a steep roof in sore need of reshingling. A rain-aged blue structure poised on the corner of a street leading from somewhere in a road going nowhere, but which I was sure became Main Street. At the last minute, the driver decided not to turn, so I never saw the face of the house from the other side. But I did close my eyes long enough to perceive that one of the several mimes sitting behind and around me had the impression, perhaps even the conviction, that every facet and feature of this house, yes, even the tower, came in sets of prime numbers. And the next house was a tidy red arts and crafts bungalow that exuded the energy of a Volkswagen Bug that wishes it were a fire truck. Selfishly to the south stood a well-preserved 3-story green Gothic, and a man sat painting the railing, and the paint was a primer, which matched the white of the rest of the porch railings, the pickup truck, and a spill on the pavement from a previous white paint or primer-related mishap. We were pretty close to the church, to those red bricks and rose hips, as I could see by the approaching steeple. I wasn't sure if I was ready to really fight for it, let alone to enact it. Imagine, a very creative and fighting pastor holds open the basement door of a church and a hearse idles. In shuffles the cold breath of the father, the color of earth that must never be watered. Then comes the low thump of a mother released from a lamp. And before her she is holding a basket. While she waited for a crystal thermometer, she placed her hand on a belly while in her other there lay down in the palm of a fist the form of a bellicose green man. And in the presence of sickness, yes, only this clever and fighting sickness, did she begin really to understand. She was the murmur of the custodian's radiator if a bird was the cry of a broken branch. And she was the heat and the chrome on a car that must never be driven, still idling. And she was the play of 1,000 tadpoles in a tide pool of a pinecone bog, and later a single pollywog aching and rain-swollen and unknown to a net as a net to a thread, or the gradual tightening of ideas that some very tall people are certain produces it. And she was a toothpick in a tackle box in a flatbed overflowing with minds. Be creative. I could hear the woman whispering she was addressing the tired and aching pastor in a voice too small for any but me to understand. And then I began to notice the minds rather slowly begin filing in, filling the basement. In a world with so much coming and going, you might imagine some form of language or of a secret code flowing to and from mimes as they strode around on the backs of their tanker trains or made coffee for one another while they waited up at night for some new news. What I am told is that really the heartbreaking and unswallowable reality was that these mimes, even the sick and yellowed mimes of the oldest church's most musical furniture, could not interact, could not scratch imagining any interaction. The only sense in which they had anything to do with each other was in the tendency of those through whose hands they had manifested not to overlap them as they drew them on the underside of a bed, a desk, or a radiator, or on the back of a left-handed janitor's right hand. You should know, dear friend, that this particular pastor may have missed the mimes because the language we use normally, I mean the language typical of a schoolyard or a computer lab or a ceremony around a flag at half-staff, in which we tend to talk about the things that the mimes have created or which support their habits and feed their stomachs, is not intuitive to most people on land. For the language of mimes is known only to janitors, most pastors, and roughly 19% of surveyed farmhands. And it would, of course, take the light of a special kind of an incandescent and aching janitor to begin to inspire the change in speaking, writing, and thinking, speaking that it is needed for one, many, or any other to perceive, piece by piece, the nearest edge of the line of the story of the creation, propagation, and maintenance of a good chance. If there is one way to begin to see the mimes, that is to endeavor to train as a proper janitor, pastor, or farmhand, it is to lay down and face up, not prone but supine under the unswept dust of 1,000 pastels, apples, and crucifixes, and take a look at the markings that only a distracted pupil could scratch under a desk while a teacher intones a poem, a prayer, or some fact about the evolution of land plants. It is there, and only for the eye of a mime, that the need to be creative can really be said to be possible to appreciate at a glance. And there it is that the only true theaters which, dear friend, it is your fight to insist beget all other theaters, can be seen to operate silently and solely for the minds of those holy custodians of Christ's proper cleanliness for whose apprehension their shows have been planned. I remember that by the time the pastor was seated comfortably at the piano, he was already singing softly. And though I could not hear it, I saw that the mimes assembled in that church basement, now up to the windows, were also singing. And as the song loudened, I heard the tinkling reverberations of a new song echoing back at me. And as the pastor's voice raised and threw open the door to the church's toy room, the song grew louder. And I saw a blue and yellow ball-colored plastic cannon. I heard the echo of drumsticks and a child's play oven which was by now overflowing with mimes. And in the mechanical reverberations and the miniature carousels, I could see that the toy room was and always had once been itself a sanctuary. I saw piles of sleeping doll legs and plastic carrots, bananas, and the black handles of miniature saucepans. In the hues of a window of sunlit stained glass. And I heard an echo of echoes, and the room rearranged itself to reveal the shape of a staircase. And my ear ran down into a deeper toy room, another level below the above-ground churchyard. The singing continued and was joined now by a third song, which in turn rattled loose enough toys to reveal another stone staircase, another toy room, and another sanctuary, and a pastor that was a baby blue jack in the box, and I heard it breathing. And as all three songs quickened by another. And from far below I could hear a sermon on a stain in the carpet, the color of an old dog's clogged tear duct reflected in the gleaming eyes of 1,000 fathers. And I could hear a choir of 30,000 mimes heralding the return of a peach pit in the ruins of fountains. And then, with the aid of plenty of mimes, a farmhand and a few janitors, this aching and tired church pastor stood up and sang the final chorus a cappella. Be creative. Please be creative. Be creative. Please be creative. There is more to thinking than planning and reasoning. A seed imagines a seed pod at least a season before becoming a seedling. Unlock the mimes, you will in time. So plant a pea in the pepper patch. So plant a pea rich, they pay.